Ladies and gentlemen, once again, the first speaker, Peter Carr, over to you.
Thank you very much. My mic's good. Thanks, everyone. I just got off the phone to Glenn Maxwell, and the Royals want their scoreboard back. This has got to be one of the biggest screens I've seen in a while. I want to talk to you today based on some experience and my role as an analyst, and also as a consultant. You heard in that intro that I did have a role as a CIO for a number of years, and I think, you know, if I reflect on my time as an analyst, but also my time as a CIO, some of the most stressful moments I ever had was dealing with the security side of my role. So I'm always in awe of those that choose the CSO path as a career, because I understand how stressful it can be. And so that sort of leads into the topic of today's presentation, which is this concept of resilient adaptation. It's sometimes been described to me that cybersecurity is often like the concept of a ballerina dancing on a tiger's back. And, you know, it's a really great analogy to use, because you have this complex relationship between something that is really beautiful, which is the work that we do in the organisations that we have, and this constant danger that if you disrupt it, things could go horribly wrong. But it also requires us to think about this concept of mastery. If you think about ballet and a ballerina, you really have to train for years and years and years and decades sometimes to become a master of that. And so it's the balance of mastery and risk as well. And so that's a wonderful analogy for us to think about. The challenge for most organisations, though, is that we sort of look like this. You know, we don't. Our reality of our organisations is that we're more like elephants than tigers, and certainly our mastery of the skills sort of sees us falling off the back of the elephant and probably sort of being eaten by the tiger. So what I want to talk about is to give you some thinking frameworks about how to potentially manage cybersecurity better moving forward. Some of the comments that we've already heard this morning sort of go to those themes of technology always changing, new services and solutions coming into the market, new problems we're having to face all the time. One of the reasons that we're seeing that is because there's something going on in the world at the moment, which is what we call the intersection of digital and physical realities. And so what that means, if you are a CISO, is that your cyber physical frontier, or that scope of work that you now need to be responsible for, is significantly bigger than it's ever been before. And so from an IT perspective, where cybersecurity and IT security has typically come from, we think about that in the concept of digital infrastructure. And so that is that circle on the left. What we're seeing more and more are these other digital spheres also emerging. And so digital infrastructure still represents that cyber frontier of traditional IT and traditional data centers and traditional networks and all that sort of traditional technology where, you know, for those of us who have sort of grown up in technology over the last 25 years, we've taken those journeys all the way through, you know, where firewalls have come from and where they're going to, and the packing of all that technology into singular appliances that we used to buy with separate SKUs, and all those wonderful things. The digital engineering side says that the world is changing in a way because all physical assets are becoming digital. And then some other things are happening, things that in this sphere of digital reality, where we're starting to see things like augmented reality and virtual reality and all those sort of metaverse concepts that organisations are talking about. And then down the bottom, we have this concept of existential reality, where every organisation has a sustainability plan, or every organisation is starting to think about how to change and manage these different sorts of existential problems that the world is throwing up today. What brings all those things together is this concept of digital data. And data is fundamental to the management of a good cybersecurity program, as you all would be aware. And so as these come together, it's really important that we think about ways that we can secure these new services and these new borders within our digital environment. What's also happening is this concept of change. We heard that in the introduction. And cybersecurity is something that has quite often been a service that is delivered in response to something that's happened. It may be a cyber attack or it may be something else. If you have a look at what's on the screen now, what we are showing there is an example of some of the major global incidents that have happened in the last 20 years. And so we go all the way back to Y2K, and then we come through the terrorism of 9/11, the different sorts of pandemics we've had. We've seen crises across the region in terms of tsunamis, and we've seen a bunch of major cyber incidents as well, all the way through to nuclear disasters. Why I bring these up is because every single one of those has a commonality when we're looking at the way that organisations respond to those sorts of challenges. And so if we can look at what the commonalities are across those sorts of major incidents, then we can start to think about what it takes to build a contemporary, resilient organisation. Because if you think about the way that we responded to recent pandemics or the way that we've responded to recent cyber attacks, the approaches are very similar. So if we move ahead, the other part of the equation is that we are now moving into a 21st century view of the world. And by that, I mean we're now operating in 2023. We're 23 years into the 21st century. But our approaches and our thinking towards things like cybersecurity are very much still based on the way that we've always done things. And the way we've always done things is typically the way we've approached technology for the past 30 years from an enterprise perspective. But what we're seeing changing is this concept of a 21st century shift and a move to post-industrial economics. Now, this is important to how we sort of move ahead and deal with things like cyber. In a post-industrial economic view of the region, and certainly for India, like every other country in the region, what we're seeing fundamentally is a change in the economic basis of the way most businesses are being run. Two things predominantly. When you take away cheap labour and when you take away cheap capital, major changes occur, and those are the sorts of changes that we're starting to see now. In this 21st century post-industrial economic world, we're having to deal with things like increased automation, and we're having to deal with things in terms of shifting global outsourcing services, the need to upskill and refocus and reskill our employees. So not only are we seeing this emergence or this convergence of digital and physical worlds, but we're also seeing the very foundations of our economic platforms and our business models changing as all these things come in. So what that means is, if you're sitting there and you're thinking about, well, how does my cyber security strategy fit into this new world? Or more fundamentally, what does my cybersecurity strategy need to look like? Do I even have one? or do I have an IT strategy, or do I have a digital strategy, or do I have, a specific departmental organisational plan or an annual plan or whatever it is? These are the sorts of things that we need to think about when we're putting these new strategies together. And you're going to hear over the next couple of days about all the latest security technologies and service providers and things that are coming out. None of that has changed in the last 25 years. They are just new technologies and new things. It's your approach to how you bring them into the organisation that really needs to change. So you need to proactively plan, you need to adapt to rapid change, and you need to build that resiliency and agility into your organisation. Because what looking at the last 20 years have shown, and if you actually did a Google search or some kind of search to say, please tell me all the major global incidents that have happened in the last 23 years, I guarantee you'll have more than 20. It's 30, 40, 50, whatever it is. And so this sort of draws on those concepts of interconnectedness of the economies and the global sort of model that we're working in. So the fact is, the next thing's going to happen. We're all pretty practiced about how we deal with those things given the last couple of years, but I would probably bet my firstborn or something like that most organisations are still sort of catching their breath and picking up the pace or thinking about what their next strategy looks like, and it's going to be very similar to the past, and that would be a mistake, which we can all avoid. So when you look at those last 23 years, when we distilled all those incidents, whether they were economic, environmental, whether they were cyber related, whether they were terrorism related, whatever they were, there are 6 factors that you need to consider when you're building your cyber strategy, because these 6 things will happen next time there is a major incident, either in your organisation or around the world. The first is that you will see surging demand in services. The second that you can see there is that there will be a demand for rapid information dissemination. And from a cyber perspective, when you say rapid information dissemination, we're all positive people, so we think, it's positive information. Well, when you have bad things happen, there's equal amounts of not positive information as well. So rapid information dissemination sort of goes both ways. Increased remote operations speaks for itself. How do we prepare for them? A lot of organisations were caught out in terms of their VPN capabilities the last time that rolled round. Supply chains is obvious. Uncontrollable escalation is something which is different from the first one. So surging demand is as a result of the first global incident, and then surging demand uncontrollable escalation often comes as things morph and change and get worse, or you have this knock-on effect for those incidents. And so that's the 5th one. And then heightened cybersecurity is the other. So these are the 6 that you need to think about and prepare for. And when I say think about and prepare for, when you're listening over the next couple of days about the new technologies and about the services and about the approaches, you try to filter them in your mind and put them into which of these 6 buckets they fit into. And so this is the concept of resilient adaptation, where we know, based on our experience for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that things are going to happen. So rather than take a traditional critical incident management response approach to cyber, take a continual critical incident management response to the way you actually run your operations. And that's what resilient adaptation is. That is the new strategy for you to think about. And so if I quickly unpack this, for each of these 6 imperatives, you can start to think about the specific technologies and services and capabilities that you need to embed to make sure that you address that particular imperative. So when we're talking about surging demand, then obviously scalable infrastructure, secure infrastructure is very important, but as is some levels of automation in terms of your ability to respond to those incidents, because you're going to have a whole bunch of things to deal with as well, but you can see others there. And I won't go through these rote, but you can read them, and I do believe you'll get a copy of these slides, and they are designed to be, to help you use them as a framework for your work. But for remote operations, there's some fairly specific ones there for you to think about. And just moving through each of these, you can see those different technologies which you may have different capabilities. You may have maturity in some that is more than others. You may be thinking about investments or priorities or new purchases or new acquisitions or divestitures or things like this. This is the concept that gives you a thinking model to think about that. So again, another 5 or 6 for this imperative, and then thinking about cyber itself and how some of these new capabilities move into it. So not only can you think about these 6 imperatives as giving you a structure to pull together these different capabilities within your CSO strategies, what's also important is that you can think about them now in an architectural perspective, because it's no longer enough for you to have a 4 out of 5 maturity capability in 1 or 2 or 3. You actually need to have a 3 or 4 or 5 in all 6 of these capabilities. We've boiled this down as simply as we can. When bad things happen, these are the 6 areas you need to build and respond to. So these are the capabilities. You may have 1 or 2 services or technologies or capabilities or staff engagement plans in them, but what is important is that they work together. And so what you can see here is that when we're talking about different parts of the model and the different imperatives, how they actually work with each other. And so being able to deliver these services and tie these services together, and I know this will relate directly to some of the other presentations you're going to hear from some of my colleagues over the next couple of days. Certainly when Andrew talks about APIs in cyber now, these are the sorts of services that you can think about there being necessary APIs as you start to decompose some of these services into their specific applications. So what I want to leave you with today is to really drive home this concept that we've all had a fairly interesting time over the last 20 years. It's incredible how far security has come since the late 90s, and then as it moved out of host machines onto the network, virtualization, edge computing, now this collision of physical and digital worlds, and then also this constant integrated global environment that we're working on, means that this is now one of the most complex but critical and financially dependent functions within any organisation today. So we tried to cast our mind ahead to think very broadly about what some of the next global incidents might be that you will have to prepare for. And none of this is rocket science, but cyber wars certainly, and they're happening now. So how do you prepare for them? The geopolitical landscape that we're seeing, and then new pandemics. We've had numerous pandemics in the last decade, let alone the last 100 years. There will be new pandemics. The climate change and the existential challenges that we're facing, which is going to, whether that's fires or floods or whatever sort of natural disasters that might await us. Consumption in terms of population growth and unchecked economic development. And then the final one being sentience, as the computers get as smart or smarter than us and start to make decisions. Now, whether or not that relates to how you are bringing some of these capabilities into your organisation, or whether it is how we will respond at the point that we need to when that becomes a global issue, is the question for you to sort of ask yourselves and answer over the next couple of days. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great 2 days.